Good morning, everybody. Very happy to be here. Sorry to have missed out on the party last night. From what I'm hearing, was a good one. Let's get you on your toes. Let's start with that. I got a question a couple of years back in a personal development course, the kind of course that you see in corporate all the time. And that question was, as a kid, what was the dream job? If you were going to be an adult, what was going to be the dream job? Don't answer it loudly, just think about it in your head. And I found it a really interesting question because it brought me back to a time when I wanted to be a pilot in the port of Rotterdam for very large cargo ships. I'm very far away from that now, but there is an interesting parallel because what pilots in harbors do, like the port of Rotterdam, is they navigate these huge vessels very precisely into the right direction. And I think that's an important parallel to what I do today. JBT Marel is not exactly a household name, but I'm pretty sure you've come across it at a certain point in your life while not realizing it. We are the leading global provider in anything that has to do with food and beverage processing. And what that means in reality is that we are based in 30 countries. We're listed in New York. And on the NASDAQ in Iceland. We do roughly $3.5 billion revenue on an annual basis. And just to humor you, 80% of all orange juice in the world has gone through one of our machines. And if you make your way home tonight or tomorrow, whatever your travel schedule allows for, I'm pretty sure if you open your fridge, you're going to see plenty of produce in there that has gone through one of our machines. So we're huge. And I get to steer that. And that's a lot of fun. There's also an interesting paradigm that we're actually fighting. The world is growing in terms of its population, and we all want to get a good plate of food at night. Sustainably produced, healthy, affordable, and that's exactly the niche that we're in. And the company has been data-driven from day one. One of our first innovations is a marine electronic scale that we still use in our fish industry. And we used the data from that scale to allow the yield of the fish being caught to go up from 58% to 83%. That means that instead of catching 4 fish, we now catch 3, and we still feed the same amount of people. That's a pretty tangible case of the stuff that we do. And I was pulled into JBT Marel 4 years ago. I come from a background of leading large data-driven transformations. I've been doing that for the past 15 years. I've never been a consultant. I am really with my boots in the mud, or the heels that I prefer wearing. And JBT Marel was no different from the other companies that I had previously been a part of. We wanted to be data-driven. We really wanted to. We had it as part of our strategic direction. We had the people, we had the department. But we also had too many trees to see the forest. I think that's an interesting parallel to what you see happening nowadays in the field of AI. We had too much technology focus, trying to make that work. We had zero vision, zero governance, and most importantly, we had zero adoption. And that's where it becomes tricky because data then becomes a very costly journey. And the same is happening in AI, in my view. And one of the first things that I started doing is getting alignment on what we wanted to achieve. And this slide is the slide I've used the most in the past 4 years because it is the definition that we all felt comfortable with on what we wanted to be when it comes to being data-driven. I had many meetings with our executives in the first couple of weeks, and they all said, Annemarie, we need to be data-driven. I'm like, cool, what do you mean? Because if I Googled that, I'm going to get 8 million hits at least. This is the definition that we agreed on. The data-driven business that we want to be is a business that uses data and analytics, and AI now. By doing so, we create a culture that fosters continuous performance improvement and enhances our customer experience. That helps us get those actionable insights and enables the growth of our business. So whatever we do, it's just the means to an end. And there needs to be a direct linkage to actually understanding that end. It's a pretty famous KPI, I think. Digital transformations fail 70% of the time. A data transformation eats that number for breakfast. And that actually makes a whole lot of sense in my view. Data-driven transformations are so much more complicated because people actually have the freedom of use. If you're rolling out a new ERP system, it's pretty straightforward. You're gonna get a lot of resistance. There's gonna be an entire training program to go with that, but at a certain point, you're gonna pull the plug on the old system. And there's no choice in the matter for anybody in the organization whether they're gonna move to the new world or not. When it comes to any data and AI deliverable that you're bringing to the table, people have the freedom to choose not to use it. They can do that. They can simply ignore that, which is why the entire approach that I started rolling out within JBT Marel and the companies before that has always been based on, are people actually using what we bring to the table? Because if they don't, we're just spending a whole lot of money on something that's not getting us something in return. The second thing that I find quite intriguing is that a direction in the boardroom to become data-driven is welcomed as a great idea. But if you zoom down to a more operational individual level, you're gonna get a lot of resistance with individuals. And that makes sense, because what you're bringing to the table is an insight that either tells them something that they're messing up on, or which is something that they hadn't considered yet. But in both cases, it's quite threatening. It's challenging the status quo, so you need to be aware of what that impact is on the human behavioral sides. Now, quick sidestep to an example I loved using in the past, and you need to bear with me because as of July of this year, it's no longer fully applicable. But when I'm talking about behaviors, I'm not talking about personas. That's a different ballgame. It's quite similar, but it's a different ballgame. Because if you're thinking in terms of personas, you're gonna group people. And if I'm talking about a male born in 1948, white, lives in a castle, has been married twice, and is quite wealthy, I'm gonna get this fella, King of England, but I'm also getting this one. Now, the one on the right hand, Ozzy Osbourne, has passed away, unfortunately, in July of this year. I'm still using the example because I think it's a really nice example of how personas are actually not alike, even if you think they are. Back to those behaviors. The way I try to solve for that puzzle is to start converting the business problems that we have and that we all have in our strategic directions into what's the actual human problem that comes alongside that. This is coming from human-centered design thinking. Highly recommended if you're interested in further education in that. So it's not necessarily about understanding how we increase conversion rates on our sites, but it's more about how do we make it easier for our users to figure out which piece of documentation that they need to have. It's not about how we lower the number of calls to tech support, a KPI that many of us will have, but it's more about that particular individual who takes that call at tech support and gets somebody on the phone who's frustrated with whatever they're trying to achieve. And it's not necessarily about growing the core audience, but how do we actually satisfy our consumers or customers, whoever we're serving with our product? On the right-hand side provides you a completely different conversation. And it's also a fantastic breakthrough to think fundamentally different. And I think one of the companies that has done a tremendous job with that line of thinking was something that happened in 2015 at the Super Bowl.
So they weren't advertising on TV, they were letting all the other car companies do that for them.
If you're planning to watch the game on Sunday, and if you're an American, you should know that Volvo, the automobile company, is giving away a bunch of new cars. When you see a car commercial during the game, any car commercial, not Volvo. You could tweet using the hashtag Volvo contest and tell Volvo about someone you think deserves a new car, and maybe they'll give them one.
I would definitely give that Volvo to my dad.
My husband, my best friend, my babysitter.
What I love about the Volvo example is that they realized that you can use data, but in a completely different manner than the whopping marketing budgets that other companies were doing. You can also think in terms of what are humans actually doing when they're watching the Super Bowl. Commercials are going to be aired. That's an ideal moment to move away from the screen and actually not watch it. And they tapped into that behavior massively. And this was a tremendous success. I still use it frequently as an example where data can be a fantastic money-making machine if you utilize it properly. I have some more examples like this one a little later. Good. If you do digital transformation in the right way, right sequence, it's like a caterpillar turning into a butterfly. But if you do it in the wrong sequence, then you're just going to get a really fast caterpillar. By the way, folks, this one's from George Westerman, MIT Sloan Initiative on Digital Economy. Fantastic research institute that is doing a lot of research into the actual reality that we're all seeing on a day-to-day basis. Highly recommended. Next 5 are important from that right sequence kind of thing. And starting off with the first, one size fits nobody. I have, as I'm used to, very few women in the audience here today, but I am pretty sure that when I ask you whether you would buy a dress that says one size fits all, you're going to walk away from that immediately. It never fits. Yet at the same time, we do that all the time when we launch new data products or deliverables, whatever shape or form. If you want to move away from that, you need to have a fundamentally different conversation at the start. And that's a conversation much more on how do you imagine that this deliverable is actually going to help you move forward? What's lacking right now in the way that you're interacting with your data? What is it that you're trying to achieve? Do you want to get a recurring view on reality, or would you like to get a prediction of the future? What do you feel comfortable with? All those bits and pieces, you need to have that conversation at the start. If you do that first and then start digging into the amount of people that are going to be using it and the ROI related to it, etc., to me, that's the right sequence of events. Second thing, equally fundamental, data literacy. It's an absolute superpower. But at the same time, you do need to train for it. And this is something that baffles me. I work for a manufacturing company. And whenever we have new people joining us on the shop floor, we give them an extensive education in how to work with the machinery that they'll find on the shop floor. However, when we hire people into the office, we give them a laptop, we tell them where the coffee machine is, and we tell them who to meet up with, and we say, best of luck, happy to have you on board. Who is actively training their new joiners or their already existing base of colleagues in how to work with Power BI? If that's the platform that you're using. There's very few people, thank you, there's very few people who actually do that with rigor. We've cranked it up a notch. Right now, the Full Data Academy that we offer has different learning paths depending on what you need, but we even go as far as looking at the adoption KPIs of the different deliverables in certain areas and functions combined with the usage of the materials in the Data Academy. And if we see the adoption dropping, first thing we start doing is promoting the materials that educate people a little more in how to interpret what they're looking at. Third one, people absolutely love self-service. And quite frankly, that's also what we're used to on a daily basis already outside. So why on earth wouldn't we provide that in an office environment? I don't know about you, but I didn't know the route to Frankfurt by heart when I got here last night. Google Maps certainly is my helper in moments like that. And it's also a fascinating technology because nobody's really that daunted anymore with Google Maps. We all use it, we love it, and it's an AI solution that has been our bread and butter for a long time now. whenever you use that as an example to somebody in the office, then all of a sudden like, oh no, but that's really helpful. I would love to have something similar like that. So it takes away a bit of fear from actually using what you're providing people with. Fourth one, rule of 16%. In any audience, doesn't matter whether it's your boardroom, whether it is the full sales function, whether it's a manufacturing location, whenever you have 16% of that audience on board with what you're doing, you're gonna get the adoption that you're looking for. It's a percentage that comes directly from product life cycles and the way that they're being launched. 16% is the early adopters that you see with any new solution being brought to the consumer market. This is the critical mass. And this is exactly what I start hunting for. Because as soon as I figure out who, think about the upcoming Christmas dinner, if that's on your schedules. You're gonna have this nephew that's a little more savvy than everybody else with technology, and you're gonna see the uncles from the more boomer generation connecting with that nephew saying, hey, can you look at my phone because it doesn't quite make sense. I make a point of identifying who those nephews are in my company. And I don't care about rank, I don't care about location, I just want to see who these people are. And I'm pretty sure if I ask you now who that individual is in your own environment, you immediately have a name that comes to mind. I figure out who these nephews and nieces are, and I embed them in that group of 16% that I then give a head start with using and playing with the solution that we're bringing to the table. As soon as these guys are saying, yeah, I'm happy with what we're doing here, I'm launching it to the bigger organization. But then I already have a raving group of early adopters that have gotten used to actually working with the solution. It's amazing, works every time again. I don't hunt. If I have 6 people on my board, I don't hunt for getting all 6 on board prior to the decision making, but at least a minimum of 2 is going to be better. And then the last one, and this is something that I thoroughly enjoy, particularly in corporate, particularly for an American corporate, because we're listed in America, so I need to be SOX compliant. I am slammed down with risks all the time. And I embrace them. I started realizing a couple of years ago that I'm sitting on this gigantic pile of insights, and that can help us be on top of our game when it comes to identifying risks upfront. So it's not necessarily a data control situation that I utilize, but I utilize it more from the, hey, do I see anomalies in the execution somewhere that I need to be aware of? They can accelerate what you're doing, because that is the language that many of your leaders are going to be quite susceptible to. They like getting a tool in their hands that helps them understand this a little bit better. A real life use case from a couple of years back. Before I worked at JBT Marel, I was working at a large global software provider. And it was an interesting company to work for. They had started off as an on-premise software solution back in the 80s, had gotten their way to global presence, were doing an amazing job, and were at the same time starting to see a bit of a tipping point. We were starting to lose customers, existing business, while having tremendous new business fly into the company. But we also had a business culture where it was rewarded that you would get new customers in. And providing TLC to your existing customers was not necessarily at the center of what we were doing. We were getting to a point where customers were actually starting to leave us. And when they left us, very often we heard from the internal organization, yeah, we could have seen that one coming. It was something that we did realize quite a lot. But what we didn't realize is that before customers came to the point that they were leaving us, they already had problems with us for a longer time. And what we did wrong is that we, whenever had a customer that had a problem, we allowed that customer to become the problem. And we wanted to get on top of that. What we started doing is trying to think of means, of indicators that would help us understand that a certain customer was actually not too happy with what we were doing, and thinking a little bit more advanced in terms of, can we combine that a little bit? So we started looking at overdue debtor positions, and we started looking at no registered contact recently in our CRM platform. And we also started looking at, hey, this customer used to give us calls quite frequently to our support desk, but actually not doing that anymore. And we decided that although these smaller KPIs were not necessarily very powerful in an isolated manner, we were just sort of wondering what would happen if we would throw them into one mix. So we built an algorithm, and we said, okay, let's see what this tells us. And we then found out that the algorithm with 65% certainty could predict a customer from leaving us in 2 years from today based on the data that we had in-house. Now, 65% is not 100%, I get that, but it's certainly good enough to pick up the phone and give that customer a call and say, hey, how you doing? And to actually have a few more targeted actions. We took that up a notch, because remember those behavioral things? We started realizing that if we have that insight, it's packed in a dashboard somewhere, but you can argue that that's not good enough. You actually want to couple a few behaviors of your own organization to go with that. So whenever there was a project manager on site, we would inform that person proactively and saying, hey, they have an overdue debtor position. Can you have a chat while you're there anyway? Whenever there was no recent visit, we would pre-populate an activity in the CRM platform on the account manager to pick up the damn phone. And if they weren't getting around to that because they were on vacation, that would go one level up automatically. And we even went as far as building a pop-up that would show as soon as a customer that was flagged as at risk would call us, and that customer would then have a warning message towards the support desk employee who would pick up that conversation saying, hey, be careful, this customer is flagged as at risk. That provides a completely different conversation, and a conversation which is much more supportive and helpful to that customer. The software company went from an EBIT of 6% to plus 20% in 3 years' time. It was astounding what happened as soon as we started to drive this from a completely different view. It's not the only company that's making whopping money with getting a better understanding of what the behavioral impact is, because Daimler Trucks is doing something similar. I'm not affiliated with Daimler, but they have been driving this domain very carefully, very successfully for a couple of years now. What they started realizing as soon as a truck would roll off the shop floor is that that truck, if you consider it to be a digital asset, actually tells you a great deal of things that are relevant on the performance of that truck. And whenever there's a near failure happening in that engine, it goes as far as pushing a message to the truck driver saying, hey, you need to make your way to the nearest service facility because this truck is going to break down in a few hours from now. Make your way there. There's going to be a mechanic waiting for you, briefed on what needs to happen with this particular engine and the spare part on site. Daimler is not just providing that as a courtesy, they're actually selling it with uptime guarantees. And any company that uses transportation loves paying for that. And then there was AI. And I think it's really the biggest hype since the launch of the iPad. I think anybody in this room is confronted on a daily basis with people who are knocking on their door and saying, hey, can I get some of that really cool stuff that you guys are building? Would be kind of cool. But to me, the fun thing with AI is that you need to think about finding the right sound wave. Sorry, say again. Oh, that's you. AI mingling in the conversation here, nice. Because many companies are utilizing AI with their use cases and their proof of concepts from the means of trying to reduce, as in being faster and cheaper. And that makes sense, it's a good starting point. But you can also reimagine things a little bit. You can start amplifying. Where's the extra brain power when you need it? Well, you have it. It's there now for you. And you can even go as far as discovery, finding new opportunities that you didn't even think of before. And the way that I'm positioning AI for my organization is as human as possible. I present it as the recent graduate that has joined our company, really smart guy or girl, really savvy, doesn't necessarily understand the full picture yet, so is a little bit prone to errors occasionally. But if you start feeding it with a lot of information and you tell it in terms of feedback what you're happy with and what could do with a little improvement, it's going to crank up the adoption very quickly. We all know these guys joining our company and we're quite happy with them because they can be very powerful, just not in the first couple of weeks. So I'm very deliberately positioning AI by means of it's not perfect and that's absolutely fine. And that gets us a completely different conversation because it helps for people not to burn it down immediately. What I also focus on is confirmation bias. Particularly when it comes to solutions that are a little more data science-y, they sometimes come up with insights that do not make sense. That's a so outrageous type of conclusion that you're going to be presented with, that can be true. That's a very normal human response. Now, even though that might be super valuable as an insight and you don't want to disregard it, it's also conflicting with the ability of any human to embrace the conclusion that is being presented with. So you need to be really comfortable with these types of solutions in order to really buy into what you're seeing. Confirmation bias is quite fundamental. So sometimes I very deliberately present the easier to consume edible chunks and then we crank it up a notch. But otherwise, I'll have people checking out without telling me. There's an important guy in Belgium right now, highly recommended. He is a data scientist / stand-up comedian. Love him.
A few years ago, they had trained a neural network to recognize wolves from huskies. So they gave it a lot of pictures of wolves and huskies, and it trained and it trained and it trained until it could tell them apart. Then they tested the network and it worked really well. Until one moment, they showed it a picture of a wolf, and the network said, this is 100% sure a husky. Something went wrong. You can't ask the network, why do you think this is a husky? Because it doesn't even know itself. What they did then was they built new software that could try and find out what parts of the picture were most important in this answer. You can feed it the same picture again and again and change a certain color in one part and then see if it influences the answer. You can build a heat map of the picture. That's how they find out that to tell wolves from huskies, the neural network was looking at one thing only. Is there snow in the background? If in the training data, all the huskies had snow in the background and all the wolves had no snow in the background, then this is what the network picks up. This neural network does not know that it's comparing animals. It is only trying to find the biggest statistical difference between two sets of training data. And if it's the snow in the background, then this is what will influence the decision. This anecdote, this snow in the background anecdote, has become a sort of metaphor, a sort of warning for AI scientists. Always be careful of hidden biases in your training data that you're not aware of, because they will influence the network even without you wanting it or even without you realizing it.
Use your AI to validate your AI, please. We do it all the time. It's fantastic, works like a charm. What we're also doing, because like I said, I do this kind of stuff. I don't just talk about it, we actually do it. Stuff that we currently have in our playground, and the word is chosen very deliberately. I'm positioning as a playground. We are working with transactional chatbots for back office processing. People in procurement wanting to check on accounts payable whether the invoice to the vendor has already been paid or not. Why on earth are we sending Teams messages for these kind of things? We also use it for automatic fraud detection in that same accounts payable process. I am part of the leadership at a manufacturing company which consists of over 65 acquisitions. Our landscape, our ERP landscape, is scattered beyond belief. I have more than 35 ERP systems running in parallel. I use the power of that one gigantic data lake that I have to see whether I can detect any patterns, and I start with the risks. Remember, step 5. What we're also doing, and that's quite interesting, anybody within a manufacturing company can attest to this, factory shop floor utilization is an important paradigm. It's also quite costly. You don't want to see processes stopping over there because of whatever reason. And we're combining that with our order book forecast, which gives us a fundamentally different planning right now on the shop floor and a much better cost optimization in that section of our company. And then JBT Marel is a fairly recent merger of 2 very large companies, JBT and Marel, you would have guessed, which means that we're trying to really get down to very mundane things, as in who on earth is our customer and where are we doing with that same customer across both legacy companies. Customer 360s are an obvious way to go, but driving a white spot analysis has boosted our pipeline in sales tremendously. This is very much rooted in that existing business example of the software company. You have so much gold already lying around on the floor that you're not even picking up on. Lastly, 2 slides. Just some personal recommendations. These are the books and the podcasts that I like a lot. First one is mandatory reading material for anybody in my data function. Data Story by Nancy Duarte is an amazing book on how to talk about data. It bridges that gap between that amazing deliverable and a business user that needs to embrace that. Nancy has done fantastic work in the past on storytelling and has jumped into the field of data, and it's quite the game changer. Highly, highly recommend it. If you have a LinkedIn Learning subscription, she also has a fantastic curriculum on that platform. Worthwhile checking out. Second one is a book from the guy that you just saw, and that's the book I highly recommend to any business leader around me who doesn't understand AI, because this guy explains it in a fairly funny, witty way. A lot of fun. He also does quite a lot of shows in Belgium and the Netherlands, so whenever you're in the area, check out his tour schedule. A lot of fun. And then lastly, and it's fun, Spotify Wrapped came out this morning. Who had surprises in there? Love that part. But my most listened to podcast over the year of 25 is The Data Chief. The Data Chief is a bi-weekly episode released podcast that has these interviews with data leaders across the world, across a variety of industries, telling from experience, just like I've been doing here. Love it. Highly recommend it. Now, if you're going to take one thing home from this, whatever you do, start with a human-centered approach. It will get you the adoption. It will get you the people embracing what you're bringing to the table. It will accelerate any curve of journey that you're on. Mandatory questions to ask yourself: what is the human interaction related to this solution? If it's a dashboard, great. Which meeting will it be used in? Who needs to be using it? Shall we put a KPI on that and see whether they're actually doing that? How does my solution help me amplify my goals? If I'm trying to be bold and brave in a new market, why on earth am I optimizing AI for means of cost efficiency alone? See what else is out there. And then lastly, what human problem are you solving to begin with? And it's not what you know that gets you in trouble. It's the stuff that you think you know, which is actually far more problematic. Last year, 4 people died of shark attacks in the ocean, and we're all terrified of waters that have sharks to go swimming in. At the same time, more than 27 people have died falling off a cliff taking a selfie of that same ocean. Be careful what you do next time you go on vacation.